What's up everybody, PJ back again. Today I'm here to talk about the latest album from progressive metal giants Dream Theater. It's called The Astonishing and it's out now via Roadrunner Records. The Astonishing is a 2-disc effort, and this isn't really something that people were surprised about. I mean, Dream Theater's released concept albums in the past with the wildly successful and highly rated Scenes from a Memory, as well as the double disc effort 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. However, what sets this effort apart is that this is a double disc album and it's a concept album, and it's structured more like a musical than Scenes from a Memory was. Now, before the album came out, we did get 2 singles. We got The Gift of Music and Moment of Betrayal, both of which are essentially the opening tracks from their respective discs. The Gift of Music really set up the scene for what would follow in The Astonishing. We have a future that's very bleak, there's no music, people are oppressed, and only one person seems to have the gift of music, and that is our main protagonist, Gabriel, who is seen as somewhat of a savior to the people of Ravenskill, which is the town where he lives. And at the time of its release, we didn't really know what transpired in the story before Moment of Betrayal's point in time. And Moment of Betrayal really centered on sort of a moral quandary that Gabriel's brother was having at that time in the plot. Now, as I mentioned before, The Astonishing is really structured like a musical you might watch, and the albums are labeled as Act 1 and Act 2. Now, the first real piece of music we get off Act 1 is Dystopian Overture, which serves to really introduce us to recurring musical themes that will take place throughout both acts of this musical experience. And these musical ideas are tied to certain characters in the plot, and it really just paints a picture of what the listener might expect while listening to The Astonishing. Now, the first act really serves to set up the main protagonists as well as the main antagonists. We have on one hand the protagonist, which is the city of Ravenskill, and on the other hand we have the main antagonists, who are the family of Lord Nefarious, a aptly titled villain. Now, essentially, the first act details an interaction that happens between Nefarious and the people of Ravenskill, where he goes to see Gabriel sing, as he is the one person with the gift of music. And Nefarious feels threatened by his talent and its ability to get a rise out of the people who see him as their savior. Now, this concept is definitely rooted in truth. I mean, you just look at the past, we've seen music as a revolutionary tool throughout the decades. Back in the 60s, with the folk movement, in the 70s, with the birth of hip-hop, as well as the birth of punk, and other genres throughout time. So that concept didn't seem too far-fetched as far as I'm concerned. Now, Act 2 begins with sort of a reintroduction of the main character themes I mentioned before, with a song called 2285 Enter Act. And what the second act entails is basically the conflict of the story between Ravenskill and the people associated with Nefarious, and it reaches a climax as well as a conclusion. However, I won't get into the details of that if you guys haven't heard the album or haven't read the lyrics along with it. Now, many of the songs on Act 2 are directly reprised from Act 1, which is something very characteristic of musicals. And this helps to show the characters develop as the album progresses. Now, some of the standout tracks, a lot of them are on Act 1. We have The Gift of Music, of course. We have the song A Better Life, which has musical moments in it which really are unique to that song, which helped it stand out. Really love the intro and the just heavy guitar riff in that. The ballad Chosen as well off of Act 1 is very good. I liked it a lot. It reminded me of other ballads that Dream Theater had done in the past, which are some of my favorite songs by them, songs like Wither or Forsaken. Another big standout on this album was A New Beginning, which is the longest track on the album, clocking in just shy of 8 minutes. And this track serves as somewhat of a wrap-up to a lot of the events that have happened in Act 1, and features some awesome progressive metal as well. However, the only song on Act 2 that really stood out to me as its own song was Moment of Betrayal, which felt more like its own song rather than a reprise of what we had heard already. Now, musically, this album introduces elements that Dream Theater hasn't used in the past. We have a more full orchestration, as well as a choir, which really just furthered the idea of this album being a musical farther in my mind. Now, being as this album relates more to a musical than a progressive metal album, there are a lot of songs which are very mid-paced and kind of fall into ballad territory. And unfortunately, that does dominate the majority of the songs. However, we do get some really awesome progressive and technical moments, but they do feel a bit sparse compared to the more ballad moments where it's mostly just mid-paced tempos and just slowed down songs, as well as what feels like a lack of guitars in favor of piano and keyboards. But that's not to say that the progressive tendencies on this album don't exist. They just exist in a lower capacity, but we do get some really awesome moments that kind of brought to mind old progressive rock like Kansas or Styx, which I really enjoyed, as well as some traditional Dream Theater instrumentation, which happens more in bursts rather than throughout entire songs. We also don't get any really long songs. The longest on here is just short of 8 minutes, which is kind of surprising considering this album runs over 2 hours in length. To me, this album felt more oriented towards storytelling than musicality, and I felt like the album kind of suffered because of it. But when this album is looked at removed from Dream Theater's more long-winded prog metal epics that they made in the past, I really enjoyed this album. I thought it was very well structured. I really liked hearing the same musical elements kind of tying everything together. I liked how the second disc kind of paralleled the first disc, and I thought this came out really well. And I really liked the elements of progressive metal that was used in certain spots. Going into this expecting a Dream Theater album, I was obviously disappointed, and after my first listen, I probably would have rated this like a 5 out of 10. But after listening to this like many times and just getting more of a feel for what this album was trying to be and trying to go for, rather than expecting what wasn't there, I ended up really enjoying it, and personally for me, this is sitting at about an 8 out of 10. I really liked this album, and I feel like if you're into musicals and you're open to a band experimenting a little bit farther away from what they usually do, you might enjoy this as well. Now that's it for this review. I'll link you to a couple songs from this release in the description, and if you've heard this album, let me know what you thought of it. Were you disappointed? Did you like the album? And what did you think of it in general? And feel free to subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see reviews similar to this one in the future. That's it for now. I'll see you guys later, and keep it metal.